So, week number 3, music theory with Professor Y. Great to be back here at SANS. Last week's lesson, as a reminder, should be on a notice in the St. Elizabeth's group with a YouTube link. It is available for you to peruse if you wanted to remind yourself about intervals and accidentals, which is what lesson 2 was all about. Lesson 1 has disappeared into the ether, but we do cover a little bit of lesson 1 in lesson 2, so no harm done there. Right? So pay attention to notices. I will post this week's YouTube link once everything gets edited for pleasing, because we're going to have another video clip which I'm going to edit out and I'll put the link in local like I do, or not in local, but in the comments in the YouTube link. So the topics we've covered so far: lesson number 1, finding notes on the treble and bass clefs. Now here is a question. Raise your hand if you could tell me, of the two clefs, treble or bass, which one is associated with higher notes and which one is associated with lower notes? The bass clef, or the bass clef rather, or the treble clef? Which one is associated with higher notes and which clef is associated with lower notes? Carlene, tell us. Bass clef is the lower, treble clef is the higher. Good job. Let me put the spelling in local for treble. Paste. And this next lesson was the introduction of intervals, specifically the half step and the whole steps. Here's a question. Raise your hand if you can tell me how many half steps are in a whole step. Right, triple clef, very good. Raise your hand if you can tell me how many half steps are in one whole step. Raise your hand. This was last week. If you got one whole step. We'll do Allison. Allison, tell me, how many half steps in a whole step? Two half steps in a whole step. Well done. And accidentals, specifically sharps and flats. Now, what does a sharp do to a note? Do anybody remember? Sharps and flats. So if I have this note here and I want to make it sharp, what do I do to it? It's connected with half steps. Carlene, what do I do to the C here to make it a C sharp? It makes it a half step. Half step. But sharps are also the flat of the next note. Well done. So not necessarily with the C, because remember the B and C and the E and the F are separated by half steps. But for instance, the A can be an A sharp, but this note can also be a B flat. A sharp, B flat. A sharp, B flat. Good job. Well done. All right, so today, okay, we're going to cover more about intervals in future lessons, but today we are going back to basics about basic rhythm and tempo. And our video clip for today is from a fantastic 2014 film called Whiplash. in which an aspiring and arrogant young student percussionist is brought down to size by his foreboding instructor. Let's take a look. So, you heard a lot of rhythmic and tempo associated things with that. Yeah, it's a real classic from the 40s. Whiplash. Yeah. So all sorts of rhythmic and tempo cues throughout the scene. There was tempo, there was downbeats, the and on four, rushing, dragging, waiting for my cue, counting on four, a quarter note equals 215, eighth notes, dotted sixteenths, sight rate measured 101, big boy tempo. That's a big one. So, just an example of films and movies that have rhythm at their core. This one is all about rhythm. It's a fast-paced. Actually, when you hear a fast-paced movie, that's almost a rhythmic representation of it. So a lot of these are really more advanced topics, but today we are sticking with the basics. So, rhythm and tempo and the duration of the length of notes. That's what we're covering today. So, now that we've gotten a basic idea of the way notes are laid out musically on a staff, let's take a look at how they're laid out rhythmically. Let's see. Anybody know what a beat is? Does anybody know what a beat is? Raise your hand if you know what a beat is in music. Raise your hand. Carlene. What's a beat? Okay, somebody who's already got a fixing on music. Good, because we're going to cover measure in a few seconds here. But yeah, a beat is one unit of musical timing. Think about it as something as simple as your heartbeat. When you think about heartbeat or heart rhythm, you're using musical terms to describe it. Even the term pulse is a musical term used for the number of beats in a minute. In music, a pulse is a sustained rhythm. So that's a pulse. And it's just like a heartbeat, just like your pulse. And a heartbeat's in beats per minute. In music, it's usually beats per measure. Rhythm is another term used both medically and musically. A rhythm is a pattern of sounds of the same or different length. So you've heard maybe in medical terms your heart having an arrhythmia. That's based on rhythm. So if it's an arrhythmia, if a rhythm is this, if it's arrhythmic, then it's all over the place and you're going to die. Right? So we covered rhythm, we covered tempo, we covered beats. And also, you can see graphic and audible representations of rhythm and beat and tempo with a metronome. And if you Google metronome on Google, you will get this page, usually, not always the same for everybody, but here is a simple digital metronome. And it has the number of beats per minute. There's a start button, so if you start it, bop, 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 bop. This is the number of beats per minute. And if you lower the number, then you slow the number of beats per minute down. And if you raise the number, it increases the tempo or the speed. So when that music sheet said a quarter note equals 215, they're talking about beats per measure, right? So a metronome, remember metronome? Another example of a metronome is when I was growing up, there was what would be an analog metronome. Does anybody recognize this? Raise your hand if you do. Have you ever seen this little gadget before? Anyone? This is also a metronome. It's an analog metronome. Raven. You recognize it? So, Raven, if you recognize the metronome, can you tell me what happens if you move? So, a metronome is a wind-up mechanism that is, it works with physics. It's like a reverse pendulum, like you see on a clock with a pendulum ticking back and forth. This is a reverse version of that. So this is a weight, and this grid is the number of beats per measure. Okay, so Raven, can you tell me what would happen to the tempo if I moved it closer to the bass? Do you know what it would happen to the tempo if it moved it closer to the bass, like it is right there? Or anyone? Raise your hand if you could imagine what it would do. The tempo would... Oh, you go faster, yeah. So, like a pendulum, the shorter the distance between... That's a good guess. If you didn't know it, it was a very good guess. If the shorter the distance means that it takes less time to get to the apex of the swing, and so the tempo goes faster. The same thing if you moved it farther out towards the end, takes a longer time to get to the apex of the swing, and the tempo goes slower. So remember this cue, triangular looking thing with a stick coming out of it with a weight on it. That is what is a graphical metronome. Okay. If you have the let me see. Okay. Actually, hold on one second. Okay. Here we go. So, music on a staff is broken down into groupings of counts called measures or bars. Each measure contains a certain amount of beats based on two numbers placed at the beginning of the staff called a time signature. The time signature, this one is a 4/4 time signature, which means that the top number is 4, which means that the measure gets 4 equal beats in the measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Likewise, if the time signature was, say for instance, not 4/4, but 3/4, then there would be 3 equal beats in a measure. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Da 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 da. Can anybody give me an example of what a 3/4 time signature? What style of music that might be? Da 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 da. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Raise your hand if you know. Allison, what is that? What style of music would that be? Waltz. Very good. It's a waltz. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Well done. Okay. You can also associate the time signature with sound on your Perfect Piano app. So in the Perfect Piano app, you're going to recognize a button on the far left side. This far left one is the backspace button, and this is the record button on the red button. But in between, does anybody recognize that symbol from something we saw just a few seconds ago? Anyone? Anyone? Raise your hand. Lisa, did you raise your hand for that? Do you know what that symbol is? We just talked about it. It's a symbol representation of what analog timekeeping device that we just talked about? Anybody? Raise your hand. Allison. Metronome. Well done. So, and if you, on your Perfect Piano app, and you click on the metronome, you're going to hear a rhythm. The high note of the rhythm is the one note of, in this case, this is 4/4 time. Metronome, very good. This is 4/4 time, and so the high note is the one of the 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the following three notes are the 2, 3, 4. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, you can also switch from 3/4, or from 4/4 to 3/4 by going to the 3 bars on the end here. Go to Settings, scroll down to Metronome Settings, turn it on, and choose the mode. And you can choose between 3/4, 4/4, and 6/8. So for now, we'll choose 3/4 and go back. Now it's different, right? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. We're going to switch this back to 4/4 and turn that off. And I'm just going to make sure that we are centered up on the screen again. Good. So let's turn that off for now. So if you are not able to get the video and you want to play around with rhythm on your Perfect Piano app, you can have the metronome allowing you to keep. Now the metronome allows you to, gives you a constant tempo, which keeps you from rushing. Remember that from the film clip? Rushing is when you rush the beat, when the beat is like this and you try to go faster, or you drag, where the beat is like this and you are behind the beat. You are dragging the beat, right? So we're going to concern ourselves with the bottom number in the time signature in a little bit, but for now we'll just focus on the top number. In order to fully understand music in a rhythmic aspect, we need to look at different note durations. The first note duration we are going to look at is called a whole note. A whole note sounds for 4 equal beats or counts. So on a staff with a 4/4 time signature, which we have here, we know that a whole note, the measure gets 4 beats per measure, so the whole note will be held out for 4 whole beats. Next to the whole note is a whole rest. So while a whole note you count for 4 whole beats, the rest you make your silent for 4 whole beats. Macy, what's up? Do you have a question? Thanks for the smile, Shu. Yeah, exactly. That is all about dancing is all about tempo and rhythm. So you guys deal with this all the time. In fact, because you're dancing, you cannot, as they say in the film, rush or drag the tempo, because otherwise your dances are going to be out of sync with the music. Exactly. That's a great example, Macy. Well done. Carlene, did you have a question? Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, didn't I move it? We should have a blank screen. Does everybody see just the staff with treble clef, 4/4 time, a whole note, and a whole rest on 2 bars? I don't know where there's a box in the middle of the screen. I have no idea. Let me see if it's different on... Oh, shoot. Just had an error. Okay, hold on. Copy. All right, you got me back? If you have the screen working, you don't need to touch it, because once it's going, then there's no need to there's no need to change it, because that's all live, right? And we won't be dealing with anything where you need to be interactive on the screen just by raising your hands. So everybody can get me back. All right, good. So next to the whole notes, a whole rest, we covered that. Now, you might ask yourself, what if the number on the top of the time signature is 3? Well, that's a 3/4 time signature. If this is the case, you will not be able to use the whole note, because a whole note is 4 beats and a 3/4 measure is 3 beats. So you would need 1 extra beat to use a whole note. So if you have a whole note and you break it in half, you can use a half note. A whole note. A half note is half of a whole note. So if a whole note is 4 beats, raise your hand if you can tell me how many beats are in a half note. Allison. How many beats? 2 beats. Exactly. So if a whole note sounds for 4 beats, and half of 4 is 2, then you get 2 beats. Half note is equal to 2 equal beats. That means it will take the successive sounds of 2 half notes to equal the sound of 1 whole note. Just like this. 2 halves equals 1 whole. Now, the final note duration we're going to talk about today is called a quarter note. And a quarter note sounds for only 1 beat per count. If there are 4 beats in a measure and a quarter note sounds for 1 beat, raise your hand if you can tell me how many quarter notes are in 1 measure in a 4/4 time signature. Here is a whole measure. Try to get some other people involved. Whole measure, 4 beats in a measure, 1 quarter note equals 1 beat in a measure. How many total quarter notes can we have in 1 measure? Carlene. How many? Four. Good job. So, this is interesting because if there are 4 beats in a measure and 4 quarter notes, then the quarter note is the beat of that measure or staff. 4 whole beats or counts, 4 quarter notes. This is where the bottom number in the time signature comes into play. The bottom number is, in a 4/4 time signature, is 4 in this case. This bottom number represents a quarter note. So whenever you see a 4/4 time signature, you will know that there are 4 equal beats in that measure and that each beat is equal to 1 quarter note. This will come into play. Now, this does not mean that there will always be 4 visible quarter notes in every measure that you see, because any combination of whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, as well as any number of notes or durations can be used in 4/4 time. Here's an example. 1 beat, 2 beats, 1 beat, 4 beats. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Quarter note, half note, quarter note, whole note, quarter note, half note, quarter note, whole note. Right? So now you know the durations of a few basic notes. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at a piece of sheet music. We're going to go where we have never gone before. This is a tune called A Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight. Let me zoom it in a little bit. We're going to try and get some other people involved. So let me know if you can tell me what the time signature is. Wait a minute. Did I zoom it in too much? I did. No, I didn't. Raise your hand if you can tell me what the time signature is on this song. Here's a hint. It's way over here on the left-hand side. Raise your hand if you can tell me what the time signature is. What's the time signature? Raven, what's the time signature? Four, 4, good job. So, 4 beats in a measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. and the quarter note is the bass beat in the measure. So in this case, 1 quarter note, 2 quarter notes equals a half note, 1 quarter note altogether is 4. So the quarter note is the bass beat. Now there are time signatures like 6/8 where the 8th note is the beat. But we're not going to cover that right now. We're just giving you an example of how things work. Okay, so real quick as we're winding down the hour, just double check and make sure that can see everything I'm seeing. Yes, good. Who can tell me what this note is? What's that note that the pointer is on right now that I'm circling? You can have as many as 2 of them in a 4/4 time signature measure. Raise your hand. Somebody besides Raven, Carlene, or Allison? Anybody else? Anyone? You 3, feel free to jump in if nobody else raises their hand. Allison. Oh, okay, wait a minute. Carlene sits on her hands. All right, I'll open it up to anyone. Who can tell me what that note is? What the duration of that note is? Multiple choice. Is it a whole note, a half note, or a quarter note? Allison. The one that I'm circling right now on the screen, right in the middle, above the word when. Half note. Good job. What about this note right here that I'm circling right now? Anybody else? Anyone? And I mean anyone. Raise your hand if you can tell me what note this is. Oh, well done, Raven, but make sure you raise your hand. And finally, this note underneath, which is above the word ling. What's that note? Raven, what is it? Well done. So that's what we're covering today. These are the basics. Time signature. Exactly. It's okay, and I didn't really go through what they looked like, but the whole note is a circle, and in a 4/4 time signature, it will take up the whole measure because it's a whole note and it takes 4 beats. The half note is half of a whole note. There can be as many as 2 in a 4/4 time signature, and it has the circle, but it has a stem going down. Sometimes the stem can go up or down depending on where you are. I don't know much about writing music notation. You just need to know that there's a circle with a stem going up or down, and a quarter note is the same thing but with a darkened in circle with a stem going up or a stem going down, up or down. Any questions before we end for today?